So this YouTube video is a little different. I'm going to start talking at you, taking up this whole screen with the whiteboard, and then we're going to transition to the little laptop view where I'm going to talk about specific use cases for different variations and include a little link to a list of variations I like to use. Before we do that, we need to talk about what is a variation and why we do them. So variation for powerlifting purposes is anything that is not your competition movement in that 1 rep range. So that can be something as easy as going from singles to fives or sixes, or it can be something like a specialty bar or different modifiers like pauses and tempos, as well as bar placement or grip distance on a bench or a squat. So why we do these two biggest reasons are going to be defeating our weaknesses and defeating adaptive resistance. What is adaptive resistance? We're thinking law of diminishing returns here, so the longer you do something, the less you're going to get out of it. So it seems pretty intuitive that if I ran 1 year straight of competition singles only on my squat, I'm probably not going to get much stronger. I'm probably going to get beat up. I'll probably be broken after a couple weeks. Versus if I split it up throughout a couple different blocks of changing my variations, changing my modifiers, and changing my rep ranges, I'm going to make a lot more progress and I'm going to stay healthy that way. All right, let's switch to the computer. Okay, so we are onto the PowerPoint now. Nice little intro slide. So types of variations, we're going to talk about first. Two biggest things you're going to think about are going to be your specialty bars. So that can be your SSB bar, camber, Swiss bars, deadlift, squat bars, etc. Really anything like that. Uh, and then on top of that, you have your modifiers. So we're going to think here pauses, even something as simple as your rep schemes, your bar placement. On squats, think about high bar, low bar, front squat, anything like that. On bench, we can look at grip width, close grip, wide grip. We can look at execution, so that could be something like tempo, pauses again, or that bar placement grip width we talked about. And then finally, variable resistance, whether that's bands or chains. I don't want to get too much into those cults. I know people feel pretty strongly about their bands and chains. So a couple easy examples here: deficits, SSB, and then close grip pause, super short pause bench press. So next slide, when and how do we program our variations? So two big ways in an off season. Number one, that's going to be your primary exercise, can be any type of variation that's going to target your weaknesses. So easy example here for an off season, say you need to work on some quads and a little bit of core trunk stability. So we're going to run our primary squat as a paused front squat. It's going to be our intensity focus day since it's our primary. We're going to load it up heavy. Maybe we're working up to a top triple here. Then maybe we have some volume for back downs, followed by assistance work. And then squat 2, so this is going to be our secondary squat. This will be more volume focused. Competition squat, so we're still doing that comp movement, just keep that skill feeling good, drive a little bit of progress, but it's not our main focus. We have assistance work after. Then when we run over here to a prep, we're pretty much just going to swap this. So variations during a meet prep are primarily going to be a secondary exercise or even an assistance exercise. So for this example, I would like to get a little bit more specific if we're doing a meet prep. So maybe I'll change that paused front squat into a paused high bar. So that bar placement is a little bit closer to their competition day. And then this is going to be a secondary as well, while their competition squat is going to move up to that squat 1 position. And then finally, we need to understand muscular versus positional weaknesses. So obviously, we can look at, say, a bench press here and say chest, shoulders, triceps, a little bit of back for stability, and that's it. If we're failing at lockout, maybe it is a tricep problem, or maybe it's a position problem. Maybe we're losing some back tension that we're not really aware of. Our elbows are flaring out. We're kind of disadvantaging um, our pecs and our triceps to be able to drive through and finish that lockout. So we really need to figure out, do we have an actual muscular problem or is it more of a positional thing that we need to work on? Either way, you can address these with variations, but something you need to consider. So obviously we're going to start with squats here. I'm going to be focusing on muscular weaknesses. I'll add in a little bit of positional talk on the other lifts, but for the most part, your positional work is going to be your pauses and your tempos. And then over here, muscular weaknesses being the quads and the trunk first. So we'll focus on maybe an SSB squat, a high bar squat, or a front squat. Big reason for that is if we look over here at this little diagram, we can look at something that might be a low bar placement here. We're getting a lot of hip flexion, not a ton of knee flexion, and that arm is going to be shorter from the knee to the bar versus the hip to the bar. So all of these variations I mentioned are going to make us look a little bit more like this. So you see this arm from the bar to the knee is going to get a lot longer. So we're going to be really leveraging into the knees, which for a squat is going to mean our quads. This is also going to be a lot more knee flexion, so a little bit more range of motion. And then finally, we can also see that just that vertical displacement from the hips to the bar is going to get a lot bigger. It's going to challenge us in the trunk a lot more to stay vertical versus getting folded over. I know in a front squat and SSB, you're going to see that a lot, so that's why I added those in for the trunk on top of the quads. I think they can both be hit by the same variations. And then for the glutes over here, so we're going to want to look more like this, a much more hip dominant squat. So that's going to be a Hatfield like this. You can get way more hip dominant, really push back into the hips. This gentleman is actually pretty knee dominant. We can see a pretty good angle here at the shin. But with a Hatfield, typically you are able to rely on those handles to push back into the hips a little bit more. And then we have a front foot elevated split squat. You guys can look that up if you don't know what that is, but that's just going to be another way we can increase that range of motion at the hip to challenge the glutes a little bit more. All right, over here on the bench, we're going to talk about the triceps, the chest, and tension. I didn't include the shoulders here just because chest and shoulder play, pretty much the same role in getting that elbow extension slash adduction. I figured they were close enough that we can just lump that in with the chest. So starting off here, triceps, close grip, anything. JM press, I would say, is close enough to bench pattern to still be considered a bench variation and not an accessory exercise, which you'll notice I'm not talking about accessories here. Maybe I'll do another video on accessories, but right now we are looking specifically at variation. And then finally a board or a floor press, and then a Swiss bar. So anything here that's going to either take load away from the chest or just increase load on the triceps in general. And then chest down here, we've got camber bar, we've got dumbbell bench, we've got incline press, and then Swiss bar is here again because you can take a much wider grip. You can go for those wide handles, kind of embrace that elbow flare. You're going to get a lot of drive through the chest, pulling those arms in, versus if you take that close grip on the Swiss bar, obviously it's going to be pretty tricep heavy. And this might actually be the one of the few scenarios where you'd be looking at shoulders and triceps a lot more on a close grip with a Swiss bar versus really anything else. So we have the dude from Brazos Valley Barbell. I can't remember his name right now. Just doing a great example of a sinking pause bench, which brings us over to this tension conversation. So a sink or a soft touch, I think that both are beneficial regardless of which way you commonly bench press. You probably should be doing either one. For sinkers, I like soft touch because it gives us a little bit more practice keeping that tension when that bar is getting off our chest. I know personally that it can be really tempting to just kind of let that bar dump down and then heave it up, just kind of pray you can ride that momentum going all the way up. But then normally you'll run into a problem about 2 inches off your chest if you do press like that. And then for a soft toucher, I think that a sink can be pretty beneficial to expose you to a little bit more range of motion in that shoulder, strengthen up those tissues surrounding the joints, and then maybe also help us figure out how we can keep that arch high and prevent any collapse that we might get from putting 300, 400 pounds on our chest, or a lot less if you don't bench that much. And then finally, Spoto press, pretty clear here. So we're going to bring the bar down to about an inch off of our chest, pause it there, and then reverse. So kind of the same thing as working on that spot that a lot of sinkers will get stuck, but I think it's a little more natural to still bring it all the way down to the chest, and it's just generally good practice. All right, finally up to the deadlift. This is my favorite lift, so we get another diagram over here. We're going to start with the glutes. So this is going to be really anything where we can increase that hip flexion at the bottom. So that can be a deficit, be an RDL, can be a good morning. Really anything here that's going to bring this bottom part of the back close to this top part of the femur. Uh, these all do a super good job of doing that. So hamstrings, like I said, we're going to be pretty limited because I'm only talking about variation here and not accessories. So we're going to have a stiff leg deadlift, abbreviated as LDL, and a straight leg good morning. Those are both going to increase that knee extension, so increase that stretch on the hamstring at the bottom, make them work a little bit harder. Decent example of a stiff leg deadlift here. I don't have anything against how this guy's doing this, but again, just looking to keep that knee pretty straight. And then finally for the deadlift, I do have block pulls in here. I think they're pretty situational. I like to use them for someone who's not super comfortable off the floor in their deadlift to work into a good position and then eventually get those blocks lower and lower until they can find a good position off the floor. I think if you're doing them at or above the bottom of your knee, you're probably not getting that much out of it. People will say, oh, it helps you with your positioning for your lockout. I would argue in most cases, it's probably an issue off the floor. In which case, again, I like those super short blocks to work on. So we're going to wrap it up here. It's my last slide. When and why do we program variations? That is to defeat weaknesses and adaptive resistance. We already talked about where to place them in your program depending on off season versus in season. And then picking the right variation for you is going to depend on you understanding muscular versus positional weaknesses and variations. Let me know if you have any comments, questions, concerns, whatever. Reach out on Instagram, comment section. Thanks for watching.